So please welcome to the stage Dr. Gus.
Thanks, Brian. 2 years ago, Cornet gave me the opportunity to present a project that I have been working for a while. It's a bit unusual, and it's a project that has shaped a lot how I think about work and what I do about the workplace. And I was very nervous because it was the first time I will be sharing these ideas with a sophisticated audience like yourself. And all the way leading before my time to speak, all the speakers like today, they were putting forward incredible, robust arguments and coordinated views with the reality that I was worried that just the speaker before me, Haiti, she spoke about how corporate real estate in Australia could help decarbonization in Australia. And I didn't know how I was going to bridge that gap from what the audience was hearing and what I will say next. Because the next thing you will hear if you were there is that I read a book about iguanas in the Galapagos Islands, and that somehow they convinced me that I should walk from Melbourne to Sydney to incubate a unique idea about work and the workplace. Now, at that point, I was hoping that my accent will make you second guess what I just said, and that you thought that what I said is that perhaps it was a good idea that workplaces in Melbourne and Sydney should have iguanas, which is equally absurd, but at least not that damaging to my reputation. But by then it was too late. I could only double down and carry on, and I start talking about the signposts, the lessons that I learned through this pilgrimage to Sydney. And today's presentation is not about the signposts. I call them signposts because there are lessons that I believe that if we follow them, they will take us to a better place of work. They hold that promise. And so it is a bit of an unusual imagination of the workplace, but today is not about the signposts per se. It's about what happens to ideas, what has happened to them 2 years since I presented at Cornet 2 years ago. But more broadly, what happened to ideas when they do not immediately fit within the context at where we work. I have had the opportunity to present these signposts to many people across sectors, industries, and so on. And there are some that resonates more than others. One of them is signpost number 6, which tells us that boredom can become a useful thinking tool. This one in particular caught the attention of CPA Australia. And we did a podcast, and then we did interviews, and they wrote a paper on their magazine. And I thought it was a stroke of genius that they changed the language to useful thinking tool to a secret weapon, because I thought that that would motivate certified public accountants in Australia to use boredom and to see it as an opportunity to give them a competitive advantage in the future of work. But time went by and nothing really happened. All the promises of boredom as shaping a better place to work fell flat. And like that, I have been having opportunities to talk to people across sectors from management, design, property, and when we are one-to-one, it seems to resonate. But then Monday comes, and it seems that everything's become too difficult, and we cannot progress these ideas. I believe that the signposts are all equal, even though they have a number. There's no hierarchy. But there's one that I believe is particularly intriguing, and that is signpost number 2, which tells us that the workplace should promote absurdity. Now, this comes from the notion that perhaps our capability to be absurd might be the last competitive advantage that we might have against technologies that are trying to replace our mind. And therefore, the responsibility of the workplace is to nurture this quality so that we ensure we have a future in the future of work. I also have been trying to follow these signposts, trying to see where is it actually that they lead us to. And they're very tricky to follow. But I've been using the idea of carnivals, because carnivals are a very useful way to navigate the absurd. Because for a very short period of time, we can immerse in the upside down of the world and allow ourselves to think differently. And this is the picture of the workshop that we did yesterday with some cornet brave people trying to road test this. And we are in the process of writing a report of what came out of it, and it will be circulated with you shortly. So I've been curious about this idea of absurdity and how it actually can be implemented in the workplace. And I came across this magnificent work from a business professor at Stanford, James Marsh, that he calls the technology of foolishness. He actually positions foolishness, which is similar to absurdity, as a technology that can drive innovation, unlike what rationality can give us. And when I was reading this paper, I was reading every second sentence. I was devouring it until it hit me that he published this paper in the early 70s. And then I could not think about what type of great creation has come out of this technology. Why is it that we're missing? What has happened to the technology of foolishness? And as it happens, there was a Scandinavian researcher more motivated than I am to write a paper on what had ever happened to the technology of foolishness. And what he found is that while it has been very much praised, it has little been used. And reception has been often superficial, and ideas have been sugar-coated. Now, I'm not pretending that my work sits parallel to Marsh, but it has generated interest. But the ideas that has been put forward, they have been sugar-coated. So when we talk about absurdity, people here might interpret it like, yeah, let's try to do a workplace that is a bit unusual, looks weird colors with weird furniture. But it's not about that. It's about how do we engage with the ideas that came out of the absurd. So in today's session, I would like to take you through how is it that we navigate the absurd? And how can we benefit from that so that we can help the workplace progress and evolve? So for that, I have designed an absurdometer. Now, this will indicate the level of absurdity that we're navigating as we speak. And regardless of what you think right now, this is normal. It's about to get a bit crazier. So have a look at that absurdometer, scientifically calibrated. Now, this is the route that I took from my walk from Melbourne to Sydney. It took me 42 days to get there. And people that knew that I was doing this, some of them were curious to catch up when I came back, like if I was the Messiah coming back with the message of the secrets of work. And the truth of the matter is that I could only disappoint because it took me around 2 years to be able to articulate all the lessons and the signposts that I talk about. But there was one thing that I actually learned during the walk that has motivated me to continue in this exploration. And that thing is that I actually didn't know, but people sell horse poo. And the price is $2, which was a little bit of a novelty to me. But where it got interesting is that the moment I crossed the state, it went up by $3. So these are the bags. Now you know this is a finest New South Wales horse poo. And because I was walking by myself with no podcast or nothing, no music, so I was bored beyond belief and thinking weird stuff. So one of the things I thought is that I could become a poo merchant. Because if I could move 1 million bags of horse poo from Victoria to New South Wales, I'll become a millionaire. And so I started doing all the mental calculations. And where I will carry them, they were heavy, how many kilometers I could walk per day. And it turns out that it will take me around 3,000 years to move 1 million bags across the States. So my dreams and hopes of becoming a poo merchant die on the spot. Now, as I was doing these calculations, it struck me that it's easier to understand the variables to sell literally shit than it is to implement the signposts in the workplace. Now, many times I hope that my higher purpose is not linked to bags of horse food, that these bags will fill up with berries or apples or something better, not with crabs. And so that what I'm about to say next doesn't offend anyone when I say that I believe that the way we commercialize the office is very similar to the way we commercialize what is in those bags. And the way that we can turn this level of absurdity and make it useful is now to go to the process of trying to coordinate it with reality. So here is a framework that I'm pretty sure most of you will know called Blue Ocean Strategy. So Blue Oceans are called that because they contrast with Red Ocean's strategies. And that's where the office is, how the office is commercialized. Red Oceans are called red because it's a bloodbath. It's a race to the bottom. It's about beating the competition. It's about cost. Whereas the signpost, the workplace, exists in the Blue Ocean strategy. So whereas the office exists in the Red Ocean, I believe that the workplace exists in the Blue Ocean strategy, and that's where the signposts belong. At this point, I will invite you to forget about the signposts because you might not even agree with them, but replace them with your own idea. That idea that you have that doesn't quite fit in the current world of work and the workplace. And see how we can actually move the commercialization from red oceans into blue oceans. One way of doing this is understanding how is it that we end up with the workplaces that we have. What gives us the where of work? So one way of thinking about this is thinking about work as a Rubik's Cube. One that we're always in the process of trying to solve it, but we never quite get there. And every now and then, there's a disruption, in this case a pandemic perhaps, that gives a little Rubik's Cube a very good shuffle. But it's in the rebuilding of this Rubik's Cube of work that it gets very interesting, because what we're seeing is that all the different stakeholders in the world of work are trying to solve the phase that is closest to them. And so we have employees trying to solve their own phase, organizations, developers, and there are so many other stakeholders solving their own phase, and at each move that they do, they disrupt the others, and no one is actually solving the whole cube. No, but one of the first things I did when I was going through the data analysis of this research is to change this illustration, because the way this illustration is depicted kind of suggests that it's lack of care or an egocentric view of the world, that why people solve their own phase. But the truth of the matter is that it is incredibly difficult to see the whole cube, even if your job, like it was mine, was about to see the whole cube. But not only that, if true that the pandemic cube is the one that we're trying to solve at this moment, there are many other challenges that we're facing, like climate change, generative AI, and you can pretty much include your disruption there. And it seems that we are actually trying to solve these cubes independently. So we're not only solving it one phase at a time, we're trying to solve different cubes for different disruptions at different times, whereas the solution needs to be an integrated world of work cube. As you can imagine, this research is very complex, so I have been very fortunate to have an advisory panel. You might recognize quite a few of those faces. John is speaking after me, I think, or sometime today. And their advice has been amazing in helping to solve the cube. And here is the cube. Well, it's a very small fraction of it. But what you're seeing here is every single dot is a stakeholder, developers, valuers, designers. There's so many people in the design consultancy providing services around work, and they are all interconnected into how they interact with each other. And we can apply an algorithm that starts to build a structure in the network based on who talks to whom and who doesn't talk to whom. And given enough time, this network will settle in a structure that looks like something like this, which is an incredible resilient and sophisticated machinery that we have developed through many, many years that aligns work with its place through a series of stakeholders in between, which is a great thing until a parameter of work changes. And what happens is that this network is so resilient that they all reconfigure themselves to deliver the same output. And we get the office, but the work is misaligned with its place. So you might ask now, well, what's the difference between a workplace and the office? And in the past, I have defined this, that if you think about the history of work and you plot the history of work in a line, you will see that the office has contained work for a very short limited of time. It's an invention which the context that created has ceased to be relevant. But I think we should narrow that down for today's presentation a little bit more. And to define what I believe is a useful definition of an office in today's context, I will go back to a project I had the opportunity to work on when I was working at Hassel. And at the time, we were curious to think about the densities, how we calculate the densities in workplaces, because the workplace strategies at the time put organizations at risk of exceeding the limit of densities at peak occupancy. So we wanted to understand those dynamics a little bit better. And as we were going through our research, very soon we came across the clause in the National Construction Code that defines an office and that defines how many people fit inside an office. But let's put aside the actual number of how many people fit inside an office. Let's focus on how that clause refers to an office. Office, including one for typewriting or document photocopying. Now, 2016 seems too long ago that you might be gaslighted to believe, like, actually, yes, I remember typewriting and photocopying back in 2016. So I'm not going to fight that battle. Let's go with that definition. But what about today? How will the National Construction Code defines what an office is? Given what we have heard about technologies and all the different professions and everything that is happening in the world of work, how will that define what an office is? This is taken from last week before I had to send the PowerPoint to Trish. That's the table, and if we zoom in, is office, including one for typewriting or document photocopying. And that broke my absurdometer. And that is absurd and not in a good way, because it's useless. And it's not that I'm petty about the words that it's been used. What it worries me is that those words, that notion of the office, is what gave us the 10 square meters, one person per 10 square meters. And I'm not trying to build a straw man out of that clause. But when I say that the definition of the office is a set of outdated assumptions about the workplace, is based on that, plus how we still commercialize the office by the square meter and not the value that the workplace brings to the organization, and what the type of things that we measure in the office and the things that we don't measure, and how we have pigeonholed workplace design into capital expenditure, whereas it will be much more better served if it was operational expenditure. And all of these assumptions that are outdated, that is what create that machine. So let's have a closer look at this machine, especially what it does to ideas. Because this machine sits between the ideas that we have and the built environment that we get. And so we have an idea, we put it on this machine, goes through the process, and it dies. That's where ideas go to die. And that's a problem, because when we talk about picturing the possibilities and navigating what's next in corporate real estate, we do that at the top end of the machine. We still need to go through all that process for that to impact the real estate. So if after all these conversations that we're going to have today, we just open the gates and let them go through, not many will go through. And it's not only a problem of quantity, not many about how many go through and how many don't. It's about the bias that is on those ideas, because the ones that make through has an aligned bias with the machinery. So it's a good thing that the National Construction Code broke my absurdometer, because I am about to show to you my next research, and I don't want to do that while all those alarms are going off of how absurd it is. But let's replace this machine with a Plinko board. You know the Plinko board, where it's a board with nails, and then you put a little token at the top, and it starts to go down. What that happens is that it randomly creates a system in which makes to the bottom or not. And of course, a lot of ideas will be stopped, but the key takeaway here is the diversity. This system can create a diversity of ideas that is impossible in the other system. And the problem that we have in our industry is that we jump straight to evolution and we skip the process of diversity to evolve the workplace. In other words, we talk about how the office is evolving, but we still not have any diversity of thought in the underlying assumptions that give us the office. So not many of us, certainly I wouldn't, put my money into a Plinko machine that has little indentations that might be invisible, that make that coin or that idea always fall in the same slot. So the research that I'm working at the moment is trying to see those minuscule or sometimes very big indentations so that we can actually allow the diversity of ideas that we have to reach the built environment. It's have been 721 days, but who's counting, since I presented the signpost. And I don't know how many days have gone by since the time you have an idea that doesn't really quite fit within the context of work. But I believe that is in this type of rooms with this type of people that we can move from the red oceans of the office to the blue oceans of the workplace and once again align work with its place. Thank you.
We do have some questions for you before you run away. There's some being populated in the app, but one of the, I'll say it's an easy one, but what's the most impressive workplace or office that you've visited recently, and what were the characteristics that made it interesting?
For me, it's hard to describe because it's not about how they look, it's how about they work. A concept that I used to work again when I was at Hassel is the notion of habituation. So the notion of habituation tells us that we get used to whatever stimulus there is. At the time I was working at Hassel, they did a Medibank, and it's almost, you cannot help to look up and see those stairs, and wow. But that's the first, the second, the fourth time. I was sitting there looking at the employees going there, and they look as miserable as anyone else working in any other workplace. Because the process of habituation means that you get used to that stimulus. So how it looks like interests me less as to how it works, because it's in the how it works that you get to experience the culture and find purpose and so on. I don't know if that answers the question.
We do have some people from Medibank on a following panel, so they will be given an opportunity to rebuttal. In the workshop yesterday, we sort of went around this chat around absurdity and creating moments for experimentation, like mind pilgrimages and whatnot. Are there any sort of, I suppose, what is needed, or how can we do more of that in our work and workplaces?
Experimentation? Be open to the fact that you can fail. When people talk about innovation and experimentation, they want to show that they tried something that they already knew was going to work. And that is not experimentation. If you're actually experimenting, you have a set of assumptions, and of course you need to make sure that you're jumping into with reason, but not expect a result, and really allow for yourself to for things not go the way you want them.
And just a quick final one. Out of the 34 signposts, is there one that you find the most absurd? Or when you're running these workshops, is there one that's quite sort of divisive between your participants?
I love the one about absurdity because, yes, I do believe, even though Mash didn't go too far with his technology, I hope that if I get it my way, in 1 year from now, we will have an absurdity day carnival, that we can bring the concept of the carnival to workplaces so that we can explore the future of work and the workplace through that lens.
Excellent. I'll get you to put your hands together again for Dr. Gus. Thank you, Gus.